I like to talk about prevention. I like flying. I like aviation. I've been getting to fly a lot lately, and it's just it's always cool to me. It's just amazing the engineering that goes behind it. But the bigger part of that is the amount of people who fly, right? Because we understand in the church that everybody has their stuff together at all times, right? Like nobody ever causes problems. So I joke about that, but if you think about that and the number of people who fly, it just creates potential for disaster, right? And we know from 9/11, we know from being so close to Shanksville, it's very close geographically, but it's also close to our hearts. We understand that terrorism is real, and that people really want to weaponize airplanes and use them as ways to create carnage and destroy people. But aviation is we've taken great strides, and it's very safe. I don't know if you understand the magnitude of this, but in the world, each year there are about 4.5 billion people who are flown, who take to the skies. 4.5 billion people. Wrap your mind around that number a little bit. There are about 7 billion people in the world, so we're talking over half of the world population takes to the air every single year. 2017 we found was the safest year in aviation history, which I thought was pretty cool. The more people we put in the air, the safer we became. In 2017, anybody want to take a guess as to how many fatalities there were globally in the world due to air travel? You can shout it out. I know it's sermon time, but you can shout answers out. Take a guess. How many people do you think died in the world? 2,000, that's a good guess. Any other guesses? 20,000? 1,000? 600? Good guess. The correct answer is 44. That also includes not just accidents from plane crashes, but other aviation accidents, mechanical. We have a mechanic back here. Accidents happen, right? No matter how safe you are, accidents can happen. 44 people in the world. That boggles my mind. So when I talk about abuse, I talk about prevention, because what we do in the abuse world is we talk about prevention, and we package reporting as if that were prevention. So we report accidents. We train people to report if they see something. If you see something, say something, report it, and then we package that as if that's prevention. So I said to think about that a little bit with that analogy. A pilot gets on and says, ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. Welcome to flight 666. We're going to take to the friendly skies. I have no idea how to fly this plane, but take no fear because I went through a 3-hour online course that I take every 5 years. By the way, that's what Pennsylvania does for child abuse. It's an online course, 3 hours, once every 5 years. Some of us have been through that training. I know you have, Natalie has, some of you others have. Very generic, very basic, but the pilot gets on and he says, I have no idea how to put this bird up in the air or how to keep it there, but I do know that if indicators are beeping and there's a sign that this plane's going down, there are red flags that this thing's going to crash. They gave me a hotline that I can call, and the average wait time, by the way, in Pennsylvania for PA Childline, I think it's gotten better, but the average wait time was 2 hours. People are on hold for 2 hours calling PA Childline to report abuse. So I don't know about the rest of you, but I wouldn't step foot on that airplane. I want to know that it's safe to get on that airplane, that the pilot knows how to fly it, that TSA does its job, and they know how to prevent bad people from getting on airplanes. And I think the track record shows, it indicates that we do a pretty good job. The other thing that I like too is that there's this organization in DC called the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, and They do a really cool job, a really good job of figuring out accidents. It's their job to figure out accidents. I don't know if you're aware, this week there was an accident. Did you all hear that? Plane slid off the runway in Florida into a river. It becomes world news when a plane crashes. There were no fatalities, a few minor injuries, but no fatalities. Oh, there were. Oh, I didn't hear that. What's that? Oh, all the animals. Yep. But no human fatalities. Yeah, I did hear that the animals were submerged. But it becomes world news, right? When an airplane crashes, it becomes world news. Now wrap your mind around that. This plane that crashed in Florida is world news because it's so rare. Clearly, we do prevention well. But when it comes to abuse, the numbers are absolutely staggering. I spoke in Kansas a few weeks ago, and the governor got up and she was brutally honest, and I loved it. And I wanted to give her a hug, but that probably wouldn't have been appropriate. But she got up and she introduced me by saying, look, here are the abuse statistics for the last year in Kansas. Domestic violence up, 12% over last year, up double digits. Other types of abuse, neglect, statistics are up. Sexual abuse, statistics are up. And she went through this whole thing and she said, clearly Kansas has a lot to figure out. And she walked off the stage and I was like, oh, I love you. Because she was just brutally honest. She's like, we don't have it figured out. These numbers are getting worse. I pulled up Pennsylvania statistics recently, and each year our statistics are getting worse, not better. In fact, we just had a really high increase in violence among children that leads to death in Pennsylvania. The number of deaths from violence in the home has skyrocketed from last year to this year. Things are getting worse, not better. So the question is, what's going on and what do we do to prevent it? I think James gives us a lot of insight that's really important, because I think as we grapple and try to figure this stuff out as a country, clearly we're not doing a good job when it comes to violence, when it comes to neglect, when it comes to brokenness. You look at the statistics of broken homes, broken families, divorce rates, all that stuff. We are clearly not doing a good job. And by the way, those statistics are just as bad in the church. This is across the board. They don't get better in Christianity. In fact, in a lot of areas, it gets worse, especially when it comes to abuse. Those numbers are skewed a little bit, not much, but enough that in the areas of abuse, it gets worse in the church, not better. That's embarrassing. We should be embarrassed about that. We should have our tail between our legs and say, okay, we're getting this wrong. How do we get it right? James hits this ball out of the park. And we're going to unpack this a little bit today. This year's theme is wisdom, right? James talks a lot about wisdom. Last week we talked about wisdom in James chapter 1. Now we're jumping to chapter 3, and James has this to say. Who is wise and understanding among you? By his good conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom. This word for meekness doesn't just mean to be gentle and to be kind because you're just a good-natured person. This particular word is really important in the original language because it's a word that means that your gentleness can only derive from faith in a divine creature. It has no other derivative, no other root. It has to come only from having faith in a divine creature, in God. So, by your good conduct, by your good works, by your good conduct, let him show his works in the gentleness that comes from faith in God alone, in that kind of gentleness of wisdom. That's pretty brilliant. This wisdom only comes from God. This is a divine wisdom. This is not wise because you're just naturally wise for your own sake. This is a wisdom that only can come from God. and a gentleness that only comes from your faith in God. By the way, those of us who are parents understand this, right? We understand gentleness that can only come from God himself. Yesterday, Natalie looked at me at one point, because kids just know, they know how to push the buttons. So like if there's a red button that sets you off, the kids come up and they're like, oh, what's this do? And they just keep pushing it. And Natalie looked at me and she gave me a look, and I knew what that look was. And I said, breathe and count to 10. She said, I've been counting. That's meekness and gentleness that can only come from divinity, from the divine sources, right? James goes on, but if you have bitter jealousy, this word for jealousy is important. It doesn't just mean to be jealous, right? We all understand jealousy. We've experienced at some point in our lives to be jealous. But this word for jealousy, it's a really cool word, and it means quite literally the sound that water makes as it's about to boil. You know, when water's right on the verge, it starts hissing. It's that, like if you turn a pot on the stove right before it's about to boil, you know it, because you can hear it making that deep sound where the water's getting angry and it's like ready to boil, but it's not quite there yet. This word for jealousy is exactly what that means. So it's literally to have bitterness that's about to boil over, where you're constantly in that state of angry, you're just about to boil over. Have we ever felt that way before, any of us? Some of you are honest, the rest of you are liars. This is always good. This is good to take inventory, because I always know who the liars are in the church. I'm just kidding. But, you know, we understand what that's like, to be that bitter and that angry that you're about to boil over. James says if you have this bitterness that's about to boil over and this selfish ambition, that literally just means to be selfish, where you work for gain for yourself. Whether it's monetary, whether it's in your actions to gain something politically, or whatever it is, to manipulate people, all of that, this word captures all of that. If you're bitter to the point of boiling over, and you have selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. What does that mean, don't boast and be false to the truth? Well, I think what that means is to come in and pretend as a Christian. He's writing to Christians. It means to come in and to pretend like all is good in your life. Yay, Jesus. But under the surface, you're about to boil over. And you're doing things for yourself, for your own selfish gain. You're being false to the truth. So James says, if this is going on in your life, which implies what? Some of the people he's writing to have this going on in their life. If you have this bitter jealousy, if you're about to boil over, this selfish ambition in your hearts, don't boast and be false to the truth. This is not the wisdom that comes down from above. Don't you dare say that you're wise. Don't say that you're a good spiritual leader or that you're a good Christian. James is saying, don't be false to the truth. This is not wisdom that comes down from above, but it's earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. Those are powerful words to describe something that probably all of us at some point have experienced. And James says this isn't wisdom from above. In fact, it's earthly, it's unspiritual, it's demonic. Okay, so what does that lead to? Think about this logically. What does that lead to? If you're constantly ready to boil over, if you're living in the state of selfish ambition, selfish gain, if you're pretending like things are good when they're not, what does that look like? Think about that. By the way, gun violence is, it goes up and down, but gun violence, the number of shootings, that number, it's kind of trending up right now, and especially with the religious organizations, people coming into churches, synagogues, things like that. There was just another one in California in a synagogue last weekend. What they've linked almost every one of these shootings to is DM, domestic violence. That the person who was the shooter had a long history of domestic violence. They were violent people, but they lived in a family where there was denial, where people kept quiet about it. They were like, oh no, everything's fine. James is saying if you're living in the state where you're about to boil over, if you're living where you're living selfishly for selfish gain, things are about to go crazy. This is demonic. It's not earthly, or it's not wisdom from above. It is earthly. It's demonic. But then he goes on, for where jealousy, there's that word again, where you're about to boil over. Where this and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder. That's not a strong enough word. The sense of the word really is anarchy. This word means freedom, where there's just this free spirit, anything goes. It's total anarchy, total chaos as a result of no rules, no regulations at all. James says disorder, anarchy, and every vile practice will happen. But the wisdom from above is first pure, righteous, right? God's foundation is justice and righteousness. Wisdom from above is pure. And then it's peaceable. It's gentle. It's open to reason. Whew. We ever resist that? No, you're wrong, right? Especially when we're being disciplined or we're being rebuked. Our first instinct is to what? Get defensive. No, you're wrong about me. You don't know my heart. You don't know me. James says wisdom from above it's open to reason. It's full of mercy and full of good fruits. It's impartial, doesn't show favoritism, and it's sincere. And a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. If you're a peacemaker, then this harvest of righteousness crops up behind you. That's prevention. Right? We have the key to prevention, and we're talking about reporting. Well, wait until it happens. Wait until you see all this bad behavior mount up, and then if it gets to the point where you can involve the police, then report it. James is like, no, that's demonic. James calls it what it is. That's demonic. That's earthly. That's unwise. That's not wisdom from above. That's not cool. You want to prevent this stuff from happening? Start sowing a crop as a peacemaker, and this harvest of righteousness grows up behind you. Never in history, I promise you, this is not me being an alarmist. This is me as somebody who studies abuse, who lives it and breathes it, and I'm watching the trends in all 50 states. The problem is getting worse, not better. This is not from one-sided media outlets that are reporting. This is me reading our governor's report that's put out every year. It's an objective report that a group of experts come together. They track statistics. They piece this together. The problem's getting worse, not better. So what do we do as Christians? I think the answer is quite simple. We live like Christians. We sow as peacemakers so that a crop of righteousness springs up behind us. We're not going to fix this in our generation. It's just not realistic. It's not going to happen. But what we can do is we can live like Christians, that we can sow a harvest in godly wisdom, wisdom that comes from above, that we can have a gentleness that comes only from having divine faith. It comes from above, from having faith in God. We can do those things, and we should be doing those things. And I think when we do that, there's peace all around us. And if there's peace around us, we can demonstrate and show to other people that, one, it's possible, and 2, that it's right. It's the right thing to do. If there's anybody this morning who's not yet taken that step to put Christ on in baptism, or anybody who has prayer needs, we would invite you to come up, or Bob's away, but Tex is here. He'll be in the back as we all stand and sing together.